Greetings, and thank you for visiting Podcast Stories. I have decided to provide Wanda Nielsen permission to utilize the residence until the children have completed their high school education. Mr. Nielsen is going to keep making all of the payments on the house, including the mortgage and the utilities bills. In addition, she will be entitled to 50% of the value of the company that her husband owns. The automobile that belongs to Miss Nealon will be retained by her, and Mr. Nealon will continue to make payments for the vehicle. I am also granting Mrs. Nealon 60% of all assets, which includes all of her retirement accounts, investments, and bank accounts among other things. In addition, I have decided that Mrs. Nielsen will have primary custody of the children. With Mr. Nealon having 2 consecutive weeks of visitation throughout the summer and every other weekend, the visitation process will be conducted in accordance with the regular norms. There will be a total of $1,500 in child support paid each month, with each child receiving $750 each month. I am also adding maintenance for Mrs. Nealon in the amount of $2,000 each month. This is due to the fact that Mrs. Nealon has not worked outside the home for the past 5 years. If Mr. Nealon does not withdraw the petition, the divorce will be finalized within the next 90 days. Following this, the Honorable Judge Marie Matthews decided to put an end to the proceedings by banging her gavel. I uttered the single word that would lead to changes that would dominate the following several months of my life, and she was just beginning to stand when I did so. "No," I clarified. Judge Matthews halted in the middle of his position. I'm astonished that her neck didn't break off when she turned her head to look at me because it happened so quickly. The expression of disbelief that she had on her face was an extremely startling one. It was as if she was simply unable to comprehend the fact that someone had the guts to utter that phrase in her presence. She retraced her steps and returned to her chair, where she had been sitting, in a controlled manner. It was when she moved that her expression shifted from one of amazement to one of utter rage. After she had reclaimed her previous position, the icy gaze that she directed upon me was so intense that it could have easily caused water to freeze above the surface of the sun. If we were to claim that she was angry, we would be grossly understating the situation. "Excuse me," she pleaded with everyone. "I'm not sure what is difficult to understand or if you're confused with in or out. If that word is so difficult for you to understand, I would gladly give you a definition of it," I responded in response. "I'm not stupid. I know full well what is about to happen. The thing is, I really don't care. I had actually planned for this. The next few minutes were going to be extremely enjoyable for me. I will give you 1 minute to apologize, or I will cite you for contempt of court." "Well, at least you will have given one correct ruling today then." "I have nothing but contempt for this railroad you are running here," I said in response. As my attorney began to fumble through his briefcase, he was speaking to me in a loud whisper. I couldn't help but wonder whether he was looking for something different to gag me with. As she continued to strike her gavel, she sneered and said, "In that case, let's see how much contempt you have after spending 30 days in jail." Well, I didn't realize that we had been transported to Australia. "We must have been, though, because of all the kangaroos in here," I responded to him. As he was trying to put his hand over my mouth and nearly yelling at me to remain quiet, my attorney was becoming a very distracting presence in the room. 60 days, care to try for more? You know, your dishonor. I have no doubt in my mind that if you were to get banged every once in a while, you wouldn't be acting like so. Now that we've established that, why don't you take this?" While extending my left hand in a similar manner, I put out my right hand with the middle finger extended and said, "And shove it up your dried up nowhere." I continued by saying, "So it goes up your constipated a-hole. After that, you will be able to ride both of them until the climax. There is a possibility that this will turn you into a less man-hating maniac than you already are. My perspective is that you are in more desperate need of a dick than any other lady in the history of the world. To tell you the truth, I was under the impression that someone would be dialing 911 at that precise moment. I had a feeling that she was about to suffer a stroke or that her skull was about to explode. I was able to determine which of these 2 outcomes was most likely. In all honesty, I was taken aback by the fact that the smoke emanating from her ears was no longer visible. It never occurred to me that a person's face could turn that shade of crimson. I was completely unaware of the possibility. I felt as though I was being bombarded with death rays from her eyes. "Virginia, you are correct," she was enraged. I swore to myself that her voice was genuinely devilish for 90 days. Fortunately for my attorney, that was the moment when my best friends seized control of me. It was because of the pitiful expression that he wore on his face that I felt terrible for him. When I finally couldn't contain my laughter any longer and started laughing hysterically, everyone in the courtroom was taken aback. This most likely explains why I experienced visits from psychologists when I was incarcerated throughout the course of the subsequent few of weeks. The fact that my attorney's law firm sent me a letter the following day informing me that they were terminating my role as a client did not come as a surprise to me. Since you are undoubtedly curious about what all of that was about, let me explain. It might be time to provide some background information. I introduce myself as Michael Nalin. Here I am, 31 years old at the moment. In the middle of the United States, I was born to a really nice couple that belonged to the middle class. A strong sense of good and wrong was instilled in me from a young age, and I was brought up with traditional values. Those who were deserving of respect were respected by you. Yes, you did not cheat. There was significance in the fact that you made a commitment. Put in a lot of effort, be generous with what you have, and make sure that you are living up to your principles. There is a saying that goes, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. However, the majority of people never consider the opposite of this saying, which is, do unto others as they have done unto you. The Christian way of doing things refers to turning the other cheek. I am sorry to say that I have never been talented in that area. For as long as I can remember, I've always possessed what you might call an extraordinarily obstinate streak. When I made up my mind that someone had wronged me and decided on a plan of action to deal with it, it could occasionally get really ugly. When you combine that with my sense of justice, it has the potential to become quite unpleasant. I wouldn't let anything stop me from following my path. I remember going out with Cheryl H. Haskins when I was in high school. There was a time on that occasion. This was the moment when we had been going out for a couple of months at this point. There was a disagreement between us on something that I'm not even sure I can recall what it was about. Regardless, we had a conversation, and then we parted ways. It was kind of accepted that it was only temporary, and that we would apologize to each other a few of days later and get back together. This is why I placed that in quotation marks. It was not the first time that one of these things occurred. All we would do was take advantage of the weekend to relax and then make up for it on Monday. On Saturday evening, I was strolling by the theater when I noticed my cousin Harold accompanying Cheryl inside the theater. It was a really unfortunate coincidence. Here are two things: Harold and I were more like brothers than cousins. Here are two things. As far back as I can remember, we had been nearly together for as long as I could remember. We were the same age. During our childhood, we were neighbors because his family resided on the same block as mine. After that, I was aware of the fact that he had feelings for Cheryl. He was aware that we had ended our relationship, but he was also aware that it was quite likely that we would get back together after the weekend. However, we do not behave in such a manner with one another. For me, he was no longer alive after that point in time. I simply refused to acknowledge Cheryl's existence when she attempted to talk to me on Monday. I simply refused to talk to her. I was at church on Sunday when Harold approached me and made an attempt to chat to me. Without uttering a single word, I did nothing except stare at him. At the conclusion of his speech, I turned around and walked away from the situation. On Sunday, his family came over for dinner, but I paid no attention to him. I simply quit playing and walked to my room when he attempted to play video games with me so that we could play together. Despite the fact that our parents made numerous attempts to get me to talk to him, I continually declined to do so. In spite of the fact that I had actually taken his fiancée away from him a year earlier, I continued to refuse to have any kind of relationship with him. When he confronted me about stealing his girlfriend, I did, in fact, kick his behind, but it was the beginning of my punishment. It was years later when he sent me an invitation to his wedding, but I chose to ignore it. Each and every member of my extended family received an invitation to my wedding to Wanda, with the exception of him. It's true that I'm a bit of a jerk and that I harbor a grudge against you. In the event that someone has wronged me, I do not forgive them unless it was a mistake that was made in good faith alone. The actions that Harold and Cheryl took were carried out on purpose. You are probably thinking that I am a complete and utter jerk right now. In the event that this is the case, allow me to aggravate you snowflakes even further. I am of the firm belief that if you are unable to serve the sentence, you should not commit the crime. If you are foolish and make a mistake, you ought to be made to bear the entire weight of the repercussions of your actions. Expect to lose your license for a period of time, pay higher insurance premiums, and be required to perform community service or whatever else may be involved if you are found driving under the influence of alcohol. You are going to lose your job if your job depends on you being able to drive. I consider that to be an absurd tax. When a young woman reaches the age of 18 and becomes pregnant as a result of having sexual encounters without protection, her dumb tax is referred to as mommy for the subsequent 18 years. In the event that a man decides to have sexual relations with his prom date and consequently becomes pregnant, he should be obligated to assume responsibility for the child that he was partially responsible for generating. Consequences are a result of choices. This concept is known as personal accountability. I choose not to be forced to pay for the foolishness of another person. During my time in high school, I put in a lot of effort, and as a result, I received relatively decent scores. My college education was funded by a number of generous grants. While I was doing well with the ladies, I was also able to maintain my grades. In addition to making an effort to keep my health in check, I was always on the more attractive side. It's true that I got into more than my fair share of fights throughout my time in high school due to the fact that I held certain personal convictions. In spite of the fact that I was in decent physical form and that the women appeared to find me beautiful enough, I was successful more often than I was unsuccessful. Both an economics degree and a minor in accounting were awarded to me upon graduation. After completing my Master of Business Administration degree, I went on to secure a respectable position with a large corporation, where I was able to earn a substantial amount of money. Because I was not married and did not have a lot of financial obligations, I started trading in the stock market. I discovered that I had a natural talent for that, and I ended up doing rather well in it. When I first met Wanda, I was working for a few months at the time. We were both at a party. After we had a good time together, I decided to ask her out on a date. She agreed, and events proceeded from that point on. Having said that, she was really stunning. When I hear that, I can't help but laugh. In all seriousness, how many men ever make the statement that their partner is but ugly? They may find her to be unattractive to others, yet they find her to be stunning in their eyes. In any case, I am able to assert that Wanda is stunning because she never fails to garner admiring glances whenever we are out in public. All of my friends have expressed their want to move in with me in the event that we ever decide to end our relationship. As a matter of fact, a few of my lesbian acquaintances have expressed their desire to turn her on in the event that she becomes accessible. My proposal was eventually accepted by her, and we went on to get married. It is perhaps important for me to point you that Wanda did attend college. My favorite joke is that she went on to earn her master's degree. Despite the fact that she did not receive that, she did graduate with a degree in art history, which ensured that she was qualified for the position of barista at Starbucks. For the benefit of those who are perplexed, a MRS degree refers to a female student who enrolls in college with the intention of delaying the onset of adulthood for a few years and graduating with a husband who will be responsible for her and her children for the rest of their life. Yes, I am a conceited and petty person. With that, we entered a state of wedded bliss. 1 week prior to the wedding, she decided to leave her career and become a homemaker, settling into the role of Susie. The sexual life that we had was wonderful, and we purchased a magnificent house with 3 bedrooms. My performance at work was satisfactory, and I was also making a respectable amount of money by trading in the stock market. Considering that we were not actually living a lavish lifestyle, we were able to save a considerable amount of money. Not only did I contribute the maximum amount possible to WTH, but I also invested all of my bonuses in our assets. I wanted to retire before I turned 40 and then spend the rest of my life doing anything I wanted to do. Since I was so very good at what I did, my employer rewarded me with substantial incentives and promotions for my hard work. By that point, I was well on my way to climbing the corporate ladder. When I returned home from work on a Friday evening a few years after we had been married, I discovered that she was appropriately attired. She was beaming with a broad grin on her face. "Hurry up and get showered and changed. We're going out to celebrate tonight, Daddy." Be holy. Do I have the right interpretation of what she just said? The news stunned me. We had been attempting to do this for a few months at this point, so it wasn't like something just appeared out of nowhere. In spite of this, it came as a shock when she revealed that it had in fact taken place. As I swung her around in my arms and buried kisses all over her face, I took her in my arms and swung her around. On that particular evening, we lighted up the town in anticipation of the fact that we would have to temporarily halt our festivities due to her pregnancy and the subsequent birth of the baby. The subsequent few months were filled with happy times and preparations for the new life that we were going to bring into the world. The arrival of twins came as yet another surprise to us a few months later. The room had 2 young girls of a certain age. I could not contain my excitement until I was finally able to begin lavishing them with affection and have 2 young daddy's girls encircle me with their fingers. It was like if I had won the lottery. The day had finally arrived. We made a hasty trip to the hospital, and a few hours later, our 2 newborn daughters were brought into the world. These individuals were stunning, in good health, and possessed all of their fingers and toes. They had to remain in the hospital for a couple of extra days than usual due to the fact that they were twins. Nonetheless, everything turned out to be all right. The 2 families were there to welcome us as we brought them back to their homes. Everyone had a lot of joy. My mother could be seen staring at them for what seemed like an eternity. It is my belief that she was overjoyed because I had at long last provided her with the grandchildren that she had been coveting. As a result, our lives had been altered. I came to the conclusion that working for the large corporation was obstructing my time with my family to an excessive degree. Being in possession of a substantial amount of money, I made the decision to establish my own business. After spending some time playing the market and investing, I found that I was doing very well, so I made the decision to gain the appropriate licenses and start my own investment firm. The fact that I had previously been assisting a number of my friends and relatives prompted me to discuss the possibility of them becoming formal clients. Things got moving as a result of that. Once I opened my doors, I was able to acquire the portfolios of a number of former coworkers who had previously worked with me. Within a year, I had worked my way up to a respectable customer list, and a number of those clients were talking to their friends about the possibility of moving over to me as well. When the girls were celebrating their 2nd birthday, they were told, "When you're on top of the world, the only direction you can go is down." We went all out and made it a full-fledged production. It was a celebration that they would be able to view the recordings when they were older and enjoy, even if it was certain that they would never remember going through it. Afterward, every member of the family, from both sides, was present. Up to the point where I was about to leave the bedroom after using the master bathroom, we were all having a fantastic time until the point where I was about to leave. The restroom in the hallway had been utilized. Just as I was ready to make my way to the entrance, I overheard my mother having a conversation with her sister in the corridor. "I just can't figure out where those blue eyes came from," according to my mother. In response to Mayan's question, "Have you asked Michael about it?" "Oh God, no. I can't even imagine what would happen if he found out that they weren't his. He's so happy, that would probably kill him." The rest was beyond my ability to take in. After returning to the restroom in a stealthy manner, I secured the door behind me and went there again. I needed to give it some thought. There was no way that they could not be mine, no doubt that one of our families had blue eyes. It seemed to me that Wanda's eyes were more hazel in color, whereas mine were more of a muddy brown. I went through a mental picture of all of my family, and the only person I could think of who did not have brown eyes was my cousin Mary. Her eyes were green, but that attribute came from her father's side, and he was not a blood relative. I ran over all of my relatives in my head. After that, I started to be concerned about Wanda's family. At the time, I couldn't think of anyone who had blue eyes who was on her side. I finally came to the realization that I needed to take a deep breath and get back into the spirit of things before I was absent for an excessive amount of time. I was able to suppress my emotions, put on a happy face, and go back to the party. I was able to do this. For the remainder of the day, it was a living horror. I was able to be the person that everyone anticipated me to be, but at the same time, I was mentally formulating some ideas for what I was going to do later. At some point, the situation became less chaotic, and everyone left. During that night, when I was putting the kids to bed, I carefully observed their facial features. I was able to recognize some of Wanda's characteristics, while others were unfamiliar to me. No one that I could unequivocally identify as being from me was discovered. On the following day, I kept myself occupied by working on my computer while Wanda slept with the girls. My office will receive a few things that I ordered to be delivered to it. In order to conceal the invoice from Wanda, I used a credit card issued by the corporation. Moreover, I conducted some research on the local pie companies. The overwhelming feeling that Wanda had cheated on me over 3 years ago was becoming more and more difficult to ignore. Could it be that she was currently cheating on me if she had already cheated on me? I required evidence. It took a few days for the products that I had ordered to arrive. I also had a meeting with a company named Pro Investigations, and I ended up hiring them. They were able to hack into W's laptop, tablet, and mobile phone because I provided them with all of the information they required. To add insult to injury, I had also started making some financial movements. For all intents and purposes, these actions would not make a difference if she had not been cheating on me and the ladies were genuinely my. To put that into perspective, if what I believed was accurate, then she would be unable to access all of that money. I was not going to pay for her to run about, and I was not going to pay for the children of another person. I will be damned if I am going to pay for her to run around. Certainly, the girls are innocent victims in this situation, but I am as well. Allow the other person to foot the bill for her actions if she wants to run about and get knocked up by someone else. I was just waiting for the proof, but nothing had been decided upon as of yet. After a fortnight had passed, the letter was delivered to me at the office. Before I opened my door, I had made sure that it was closed and locked. After learning that they were not mine, I did not stop crying for an entire hour. Although I had a feeling that I was already aware of that, I had been holding out hope that I was mistaken. The following day, my private investigator presented me with all of the evidence that he had gathered. The individual who served as her personal trainer at the gym had blue eyes and blonde hair. On a couple of days per week, she continued to visit him occasionally. In order for him to have the opportunity to engage with his daughters, she even brought the children to his apartment with her. Indeed, the audio provided evidence that both of them were aware of the identity of the genuine sperm donor. It was scheduled for the following afternoon that I would meet with a divorce attorney. The law was going to drill my bottom without the benefit of lubrication, and I had figured that it was going to tie me to a table and drill it. I am not a foolish person. It was his recommendation that I took, yet I vehemently disregarded it. In the same way that I explained how I worked, he explained how the law worked. In his words, it was not about being fair, rather, it was about making sure that the children were taken care of. I concurred. She and her lover would be able to take care of the children without the need for me or my payment. After imparting my requirements to him, I departed. I have a feeling that he was starting to come to the conclusion that he probably ought to have turned me down as a client. After that, he had no idea that I had instructed him to get the documents ready, but I had instructed him to keep them until I phoned him and informed him that I was prepared to file. It's possible that I gave him the erroneous impression that I was going to make an effort to attempt to resolve the situation. To be honest, I lied through my teeth about that. Okay. Despite the fact that it took 2 months, everything was finished, and she had not even the least hint of a problem. I give thanks to God for the acting class that I took during my junior year of high school as my art elective. With the exception of the house and a beat-up Chevy pickup, I had finally arrived at the point where I had, at least on paper, no net income and no assets. I had nothing but the house and the pickup truck. Although we had refinanced the house and taken out some equity in order to make some improvements, the house still had a significant amount of mortgage on it, therefore, selling it probably wouldn't even cover the brokerage fees. Actually, the firm was the owner of my Lexus, I was not the owner of the vehicle. I had approximately $10,000 in cash, which was just enough to cover my expenses for the following few months. The arrival of my cousin Howard and his wife Cheryl on that particular weekend came as a complete and utter surprise to Wanda. I informed them that Howard and Cheryl had visited me in my office a few weeks earlier. I said that they had come to see me. Following a series of in-depth conversations, they admitted that the actions they had taken were inappropriate, they expressed their true regret, and I then came to the conclusion that it was time to let things go. It's a shame that you people are so easily fooled. Indeed, we did make up. There is no doubt in my mind that Howard and Cheryl did, in fact, visit me at my office the previous week. Yes, they did apologize once more, all of this is entirely true. In all seriousness, I am not lying about any of that, I am a straightforward individual. In point of fact, I did forgive them, and I am delighted to have them back in my life. However, it is possible that I have overlooked a few facts that are not significant. It's more like coincidences. It is safe to say that several members of Cheryl's family are not beyond breaking a few minor rules. Let's just say that they are not above doing so. Additionally, a few of them are rather large and do not feel any obligation to avoid getting involved in the rare altercation that takes place in the barroom. There have been multiple times on which it has been claimed that 4 or 5 of them might perhaps be enforcers for one of the local shadier groups of businessmen. Despite the fact that I do not place any stock in rumors, it has been mentioned on multiple occasions. It is obvious that this is nothing more than idle chatter from those who just do not like them. A couple of days before Howard and Cheryl came over to visit, there was a story on the news about a personal trainer at one of the local gyms who was robbed shortly after leaving work. This is absolutely unrelated to the topic at hand, but it was reported on the news. It would appear that he was dumb enough to seek to engage in combat with the 5 robbers. The crooks not only took his wallet and car, but they also stripped him naked and began to beat him to death. As a result, he was left with a broken jaw, a shattered nose, a few broken ribs, a broken arm, a dislocated kneecap, and both of his testicles were burst. The minimum amount of time that he will spend in the hospital is a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, there are no suspects because all of the perpetrators of the crime in this town wore black clothing, gloves, and ski masks. The police should really take action to address the crime that has been occurring in this area. It was said by the medical professionals that the sufferer, who had blonde hair and blue eyes, would most likely make a full recovery after undergoing reconstructive surgery on his face and major therapeutic exercises. It is quite improbable that he would ever be able to engage in sexual activity again in his lifetime. During the next few months, he would learn that his car had been taken to a chop shop and sold in pieces, that his credit cards had been maxed out, that his bank accounts had been cleaned out, and that the information contained in his wallet had been used to steal his identity and place it on the dark web. In the years to come, he would continue to struggle against that. During the week or two that followed the mugging, Wanda, for some reason, exhibited a fairly depressed and gloomy demeanor. The only thing I can suppose is that she is likewise concerned about the rising rate of criminal activity in the neighborhood. Despite the fact that I offered to raise the level of protection at the property for her, she did not appear to be overly reassured by my offer. On Monday morning, I called my attorney and requested that he complete the paperwork and file it with the appropriate authorities. On Friday, in the late afternoon, I desired to have her served. He made an effort to persuade me to make certain adjustments, but I was defiant. When I checked them out on Tuesday, the forms were ready for me to sign and review. To complete everything, I went to his office and met with him there. Once more, he cautioned me against the path of action that I was taking. After giving it some thought, I made the decision to make him laugh. She was given the house by me. To hell with it, I even contributed the investments. Naturally, I emphasized that I would not pay a single penny for anything else to be purchased. Additionally, she would be able to pay the mortgage and the utilities for the house if she desired to keep it. Additionally, it had been more than a month since there had been a single penny in the investment accounts. It was not an issue for me to give her nothing but zero. I was unaware that I had been removing all of my tools and equipment from the garage. I had been doing this without realizing it. I had also begun moving things that I intended to keep out of the house in a careful and methodical manner. The majority of that was done from my workplace at home. The ranch that Howard and Cheryl owned was being used as a storage facility for tools and other pieces of larger equipment. Things that were not particularly valuable were moved to a modest apartment with one bedroom that was located in a building that was owned by an offshore limited liability company. Surprisingly, it was difficult to find and verify the owners of the limited liability company at all. The morning of Friday arrived at last. As is customary, I made my way to the workplace. A couple of days previously, Howard had assisted me in moving my truck to the office. Following the drop-off of my vehicle, I climbed into my pickup truck and headed to the bank. I went to the bank and cleared out all of the accounts, leaving only $100 in the checking and savings accounts. After that, I went to the safety deposit box and cleaned it out before going back to the house. The cash and the contents of the safety deposit box were placed alongside the rest of my belongings after I drove over to the ranch and deposited them there. Taking the danger that they might find a newly rented box at another bank and seize possession of it was something I did not want to do. Moreover, I did not want anyone to be able to track down a wire transfer. In addition, I would most likely require the funds at a later time. There's a possibility that you are curious about the reason I trusted Howard and Cheryl. It wasn't complicated at all. As you can see, the mortgage on their property was being held by a particular offshore limited liability company, LLC, whose ownership was fairly ambiguous. We still consider him to be a member of our family, despite the fact that we had our problems. There's no way to mess with one's family. When something like that happens, the rest of the family takes it very personally. When we were ultimately able to come to an agreement with one another, there was a great deal of joy across the family. I went back to the place where I was staying. The time was late in the morning at this point. A few of blocks away, I stopped over and checked the GPS that I had installed on W's vehicle because I had installed it. She was, as was to be expected, present at the shopping center. When I got home, I hurriedly parked my car in the driveway. During the course of the previous couple of days, I had gathered the last items of clothing and possessions that I had and placed them in the garage. Following the act of throwing the few boxes into the truck, I walked inside and retrieved the remaining items of clothing from the dresser and the closet. To be honest, I didn't even bother to pack things up. Not only did I grab them by the armload, but I also grabbed the hangers. The process of loading all of them into the cab of the truck was completed in just a few trips. I didn't even bother to close the front door or the garage door when I was inside the house. While I was leaving the house, my mobile phone started to ring. And it was Wanda. As far as I can tell, when she attempted to check out with her purchases, her credit cards would not function properly. Taking one more check at the GPS signal, I noticed that it was traveling in this direction. I observed this movement. The only thing I did was laugh, then I threw my phone down on the table, and then I left the location. I was many blocks away after a few minutes had passed. The moment I arrived at my new apartment, I immediately began moving everything from my truck into the rooms that were designated for it. After 3 beers, everything was put away in its proper place. I had just settled into my recliner when I heard the ringing of my brand new mobile phone. There were only a few people who had this number, and my soon-to-be ex-wife was not one of them. She came from a different background. "Hello," I responded to the question. It was the voice that stated, "She has been served, and you should have the video in a short while." I said, "Okay, thank you," before disconnecting from the conversation. It was true that I received the movie via email 15 minutes after it was sent to me. An understatement would be to say that she was taken aback by the news. Sadly, the only video I had was the one that showed her being served, up until the point where she fell to the ground like a bag of rocks. After making certain that she was not in fact hurt, the individual who was serving her then turned around and departed. After that point, the video came to an end. I would have liked to watch her reaction when she actually started reading the divorce petition and learned that I had DNA proof as well as video evidence of her affair. I would have liked to see some of her reactions. Immediately after that, everything moved at a pace that was comparable to that of a glacier. A few people called me on the phone. Some of them were from the office I used to work at. Several times, she had attempted to get in touch with me by calling me. It would appear that she did not believe them when they informed her that I had quit from my position and that I had not been working there for the past 2 weeks. Afterward, she made a direct appearance in person and demanded to meet with me. The outcome of that was not favorable for her. In order to get rid of her, it was necessary to call the police and tell them to accompany her from the premises. A number of times, Howard made a phone call. In an effort to get in touch with me, she started trying to harass him. It seems that she has come to the conclusion that the unexpected appearance of him was a bit too coincidence with the hasty divorce that I had filed against her. Before she was finally forced to leave us alone, restraining orders were filed against both my previous employer and Howard. It was not until 2 weeks later that my attorney finally got in touch with her to inquire about the identity of her attorney. As of yet, she had not obtained one. The first thing to note is that she was rapidly running out of money. What she actually possessed was the cash that was in her purse, as well as the sum of $200 that I had left in the bank accounts. At that point, she was beginning to rely on her parents for support. Simply put, I was lounging about and chilling out. Due to the fact that I intended to be unavailable for a considerable amount of time, I resolved to refrain from beginning any assignments for a period of time. In addition to that, I did not want anything lying around that she could access and take away from me. Last but not least, she did hire a lawyer. There was a calendar of meetings. I said that I would not be attending and instead merely provided my attorney his instructions. My stance is unwavering, there will be no increase of any kind. It seems that tempers flared at those discussions, as I have been given to understand. In the end, it was settled through arbitration, which I was required to attend. They did not go as planned. Where's all the money? What money? All our money? We don't have any money. We are flat broke. In fact, I'm living in the cheapest single-bedroom apartment that I could find. Seriously, it was just because it was cheap, since I happened to know the actual owner of the complex. All the investments, the checking, the savings, all gone. I made a really bad investment. Does investing in a cheating wife count? Lost it all. Well, that was indeed the case. However, I was not aware of the precise location where all of those offshore banks actually stored their funds. My legal representative made the offer, we are going to give her the house with her name as the only one on the title. Certainly, he could have conveyed the point with a little bit more power. Instead, he sounded more like someone who was standing in front of a house that had been totally destroyed by a tornado and remarking that at least the rubble hadn't caught fire. To the fullest extent possible, it is mortgaged, and there is no way that I could possibly be able to afford the monthly payments. She let out a scream. Beginning at that point, everything moved from bad to worse. According to her, she is asking 70% of the liquid assets. Child support? Not my kids, not my problem. Spousal maintenance? Alimony for you? Fist in the air. No job, no income, no way. No assets? Look all you want, ain't nothing to be found. 50% of the business? Good luck with that one. 50% of the retirement? What part of lost it all are you having trouble with? Yes, arbitration ended up failing terribly. As a result, we will be appearing in court today. It took place in front of the extremely despicable Judge Marie Matthews, as was indicated at the opening of the narrative. As far as the history of the world is concerned, she was the most feminist and man-hating family court judge ever heard. In point of fact, it appeared as though she was much more severe toward males whose wives had cheated on them. Naturally, if it was the male who cheated, he would typically have to be taken out of the courtroom after her gavel severed his balls. This is because he would have been unable to walk. Yes, I was made a fool of. To put it another way, you are going to leave me a bunch of comments because you are so ignorant as to believe that I could effectively convince them that there was no money. I would disagree with you. I was acutely aware of the fact that they could easily examine the accounts from a few months ago and determine the amount of money that was contained within them. When the judge utilized those numbers to calculate just how far the screws were going to be turned into me, I was not the least bit surprised by the outcome. The problem was that they were unable to gain access to it. I must have had the time. Over the course of time, in order to move it around through a variety of institutions and accounts. I even went to the farthest extent of physically withdrawing all of the money from a single bank, after which I went to a few more banks and deposited portions of the withdrawal into a number of different accounts. Those accounts, of course, were carried out under a variety of different identities. Cheryl's family was involved in a number of questionable companies, one of which was a gag gift shop. In this shop, you could purchase bogus identification cards for the sole purpose of for entertainment purposes. In fact, that was printed on the identification cards. Once, I even had one that claimed that I was Jesus Christ. I absolutely adored it. The victim would yell out Jesus Christ whenever I would execute a prank on them, and then I would respond by pulling out my fake identification and agreeing with them. It was only because of the entertainment phrase that was printed on the front of the fakes that there was any indication that they were fakes. The fakes were quite nicely done. In most cases, they cost approximately $50. They would inadvertently forget to include the entertainment notice on the front of the product, which would result in a few additional zeros. Following that, I made a transfer of the funds into other accounts using electronic means. It is possible that there is a means to locate it, however, doing so would be highly costly and would take a considerable amount of time, possibly even years. By then, I would have already left by that point. Once again, I found myself standing in front of the witch who despises men. The 61st day of my 90-day stay as a guest of the county had already passed. Rather of being carried out in a state prison, these punishments were carried out in the county jail. With a sneering tone, she asked, "So, have you learned your lesson yet?" "You mean the lesson about not marrying a cheater?" "I learned that one long before I was ever in your court," I responded in response. By the time she finished her sentence, the vein on her forehead was beginning to pop. "I was referring to your attitude in my court," she added. As I was thinking to myself, I didn't think that was too good for her blood pressure. I was thinking, can't say that I find anything wrong with my attitude while I was being railroaded in front of a bunch of kangaroos," I responded to him. When she went to the doctor, her blood pressure must have been so high that it registered on the meter. I was beginning to get really concerned about her health. "You are aware that I can extend your stay in jail, aren't you? And if that's the way you intend to be, I'm adding another 30 days now. I brought you here today to discuss why you haven't made your first 2 child support or maintenance payments to your ex-wife. And where is your lawyer?" Odd, I was under the mistaken impression that you needed to be really smart to be a judge. Thank you for correcting me on that. Perhaps I can explain it to you so you can understand. Sorry if it's still over your head, but the lowest I can go is so a 5th grader can comprehend it. Do try to keep up. The flame that she was inhaling was growing to the point that I was becoming quite frightened that her bench would catch fire. When I reached that stage, I was beginning to have the impression that she did not like me at all. I am in jail. I have no access to any money. Since I have no access to any money, I am unable to send any money. Since it was your dumbass that put me here, perhaps you can explain why you were the reason that the cheating woman can't get the money that you were trying to steal from me to give to that 304. Now, did you get all that, or do I need to explain it to you slower? I was taken back to my cell for an additional 90 days, 30 days from the time I was sentenced, 30 days from the time she delivered her first rant, and 30 days from the time I was able to catch her at the end of her rant. If I'm being completely honest, it wasn't all that horrible. Even though the food was terrible, I didn't stop eating it. It was a comfortable bed for me to sleep in, and I had a lot of spare time to unwind. A lot of effort was put into using the weights and the exercise machines. In there, I didn't run into a lot of difficulties. First of all, it didn't take too much time for my courtroom antics to become general knowledge within the confines of the criminal facility. After that, I gained a few new pals. Second, did I mention that Cheryl's family has a few contacts that could be of assistance to someone who was on the inside? In point of fact, there was just one issue, and it began with one of W's relatives who possessed a lower level of intelligence. He had the audacious notion that he could get arrested for a little offense, get put to jail for a week or two, and then use that time to teach me a lesson so that I would not repeat the same mistake. Before he had even set foot inside the compound, the whole population of the penitentiary was already aware of his identity. Following that, it did not require a great deal of mental capacity to figure out what he was about to do. Halfway across the yard, he was witnessed by someone. Unfortuitously, he was attempting to receive an errant throw while tossing a football back and forth when he was run into by one of the other inmates. The elbow that was placed on his stomach was most likely an accident. As soon as he was able to get himself back on his feet and clean himself off, he foolishly proceeded on with his mission. He continued to run for another 20 feet when he was struck by a basketball on the side of his head. The individual who made the poor pass provided a heartfelt apology. When he was being lifted up, the elbow that was placed on his chin was an entirely unintentional occurrence. Then, after shaking his head to remove any dust that had accumulated, he started walking in the direction of me once more. Before he ultimately reached at his goal, there were two additional occurrences that occurred alongside him. In light of the fact that I was having my back turned, he decided that a sucker punch would be an excellent idea. It was not, unfortunately, the case. Prior to his even having the opportunity to bring his fist back, I was not in the least bit naive. The signal was given to me, and I immediately turned around and slammed my foot as firmly as I could into his groin. It was an obvious field goal from 65 yards out. He was rushed to the infirmary since it appeared that the misfortune he had endured as a result of all the incidents had now caught up with him. 2 days later, he continued to say that he would not come out to the yard to work out. He was required to remain in his cell for as long as he could until he was finally released. Ian, and I'm back before the evil queen. Are you ready to apologize for your vile outburst in this courtroom? Really, I don't know what you were talking about. Whatever. Perhaps you can at least keep a civil tongue in your head and not extend your stay. So I take it that another judge is taking over then? Boy, you are standing on my last raw nerve. Are you telling me that I should start stomping my feet now? I should probably see if they have a suggestion box around somewhere. I need to suggest that they have EMTs posted in the courtroom in case she actually has a stroke again. You have not paid a single child support or maintenance payment yet. You have also failed to pay the mortgage on the house or any of the utilities, as I ordered. I thought that we went through this last time. I can't pay anything as long as I'm cooling my heels here in jail. Second, since you put me in jail, I can't work and make any money to pay anything. Third, they ain't my kids, so I don't know why I would pay anything for them. Fourth, my ex-wife is a cheating 304, and I don't think I should have to pay for her to screw around on my dime. If she wants to screw anything that moves, she should get a job and pay for her own sex life. Maybe she can start charging for it and make some money that way. And finally, you gave her half the business, she should have plenty of money from that. The attorney for Wanda spoke up and said, Your Honor, we have been unable to take possession of my client's portion of the business. It appears that Mr. Nayland sold his company to an overseas company approximately 2 months before he filed for divorce. At this time, we haven't even been able to determine who the actual owners are in order to contact them about the court order. Suddenly, a woman who was quite attractive stood up and asked to approach the proceedings. Your Honor, I represent the board of directors for the firm that purchased the business in question. I have a motion here to dismiss the ruling giving Mrs. Nayland any part of a business formerly owned by her ex-husband. It is highly irregular to award one party any ownership of a business that is not party to the court case in question. Since the purchase was completed prior to the divorce being filed, this company has no bearing on this case. Therefore, we reject any claim of ownership in said business by Mrs. Nayland. But what about the money from the sale, Wanda? The transfer of ownership and payments were done in a foreign country. My understanding is that the money from the transaction has never entered the territory of the United States, and as a result, it is not subject to the laws of the United States. I know this because I am not privy to that information. Regarding any claim that you may have on that money, I am afraid that you will have to discuss it with your ex-husband. Depending on the country in which the money is located, that may be something that needs to take place. What country is that? The initial transfer of funds was in Belgium, but my understanding is that the money was transferred somewhere else shortly after the sale. The young woman responded to the question posed by the attorney representing my ex-wife. Your Honor, the attorney representing my former spouse said once more, my client is in a desperate situation right now. Due to the fact that the mortgage has not been paid for the past 3 months, the house is likely to be put into foreclosure. In the near future, the utilities will be turned off. Initially, my client's parents were able to provide some assistance, but presently, they are finding that it is becoming too much for them to handle. The client that I work with has secured employment, but it is as a waitress at a small diner. It does not pay nearly enough to cover the costs of maintaining the residence. Mr. It is Neil's responsibility to bring all of the payments up to date within the next week. Oh sure, absolutely. Please allow me to bend over and simply remove the cash from in between my teeth. I didn't realize there wasn't any there. I am sorry. Unfortunately, I am unable to cooperate due to my physical condition. Maybe I haven't expressed it in a way that is sufficiently clear. I am currently incarcerated. The money that you all believe I have is not available to me in any way, shape, or form. Due to the fact that I am currently incarcerated, I am unable to work, and as a result, I am unable to obtain any revenue through any other means. You continue to believe that I have a large amount of money lazily lying around in my cell. They inspect it once a week, so you should ask the guards. I objected to the fact that you continue to order me to pay, but you do not provide me with the option to do so. It is Mr. Nayland. You have the ability to have your attorney access your accounts and transfer the monies to your ex-wife. To begin, as you can plainly see, I do not have a lawyer, Nayland said. The second question is, which accounts are you referring to? These accounts that do not exist? And where exactly are they? I am making numerous attempts to explain it to you. You refuse to believe that I am completely broke, yet you insist that I am? Third, even if these phantom accounts did exist someplace, do you truly believe that I had the knowledge necessary to access them in my head? In order for me to gain access to these phantom accounts, I would need to have access to my financial records in order to obtain the routing numbers and bank account numbers. Considering that there are no accounts, all of that is irrelevant anyhow. It would be very appreciated if you could provide me with the account information for these accounts if you are of the opinion that they do, in fact, exist. What happened to all of the money that was in your investments, savings account, and checking account? Next, I informed you that the last time, it was a couple of investments that were extremely poor. I took a chance and got wiped out. What about the money from the sale of your company? The corporation was in horrible position due of their investments. My only option was to sell it at a low price and use the proceeds to satisfy my expenses. The remaining funds are completely depleted. It is Mr. In all seriousness, Nayland, do you really believe that this court is on board with that hogwash? I gave a shrug and said, I absolutely do not care if you believe that I am lying. Show me the account details where I'm storing all that money. What I think is that she stole all the money and is attempting to screw me over while she is screwing her boyfriends. The attorney for her client yelled out, that doesn't even make sense. It makes as much sense as keeping me in jail where I have no access to money, then demanding that I make all of these payments you all want, I responded. Mr. Nayland, are you aware that I can keep you in jail until you pay? The judge inquired. I just gazed at her like she had suddenly acquired a third eye. Okay, I'll play along. Go ahead and keep me where I am unable to abide by your orders as you keep making demands that are simply impossible for me to accomplish. That sounds logical. 3 months later, the house had been foreclosed on. Wanda had lost her Lexus because she couldn't afford the payments. She was now living with her parents because she couldn't afford an apartment for her and the girls. She was working 30 hours a week at the diner. They were begging the judge to let me out so I could start making some sort of payments. Loverboy had been released from the hospital and was in physical therapy. He was spending hours every day trying in vain to clear up his financial situation. The only good thing was that no new credit card accounts were being opened in his name. That's because his credit rating by this point was so low that no one was willing to issue any more credit cards in his name. He only had minimal insurance coverage on his car, so he didn't get anything from that. Since he didn't work full-time at the gym, he had personal health care insurance with very high deductibles. It was going to take him years to pay off his medical bills. I had finally gotten a lawyer. She had made a deal with the judge to let me out of jail so I could get a job and begin making payments. I had to surrender my passport because they were still convinced that I had money somewhere and I was a flight risk. I was a good boy and went to work at the local Taco Bell. By this time, I was living at the ranch with Howard and Cheryl. I was being watched in case I had a stash of cash laying around. Of course, I knew that and had easily figured out who was watching me. They couldn't come onto the ranch property, so they had to do their surveillance from the road. Little did they know that most of the cash was already in my possession. I did that for the next 3 months. Wanda used a court order to attach my wages from my job. I didn't care. I was making minimum wage, so she didn't get much. Over that time, I was finalizing my plans. Howard had emptied out my apartment while I was in jail. He had divided up everything between my extended family. A couple of weeks earlier, several packages had been shipped from my extended family. Those packages had all been addressed to the same location. Several of Cheryl's family members had been over to visit at different times. We even had a few barbecues with them as well as most of my extended family a few times. What the surveillance didn't see was that the guests would go over to the sheds behind the house and take some packages back to their vehicles throughout the day. Over the next couple of weeks, those packages would be repackaged and shipped away. My time was spent either working or at home. I never went out. Taco Bell eventually had to get a restraining order against Wanda because she was constantly coming into the restaurant to harass me about the money I owed her. It became disruptive. Sure, they could have simply fired me, but a slip of cash to the manager changed her mind on that. When I needed to meet with my lawyer, she came over to the ranch. We had a lot of meetings. Oh, I didn't tell you about my new lawyer. Of course. I did. She was representing the interests of the new owners of my former company that day in court. Once she completed that, I hired her as my lawyer. She's a real shark too. Well, I prefer to think of her as a barracuda, especially when she is skinny dipping in the pool. She's sleek, lean, and will attack suddenly when I'm sitting naked on the edge of the pool. She also has a voracious appetite, grin. What do you mean that it is unethical for a lawyer to sleep with their client? I did say she is a lawyer, right? An ethical lawyer? You're kidding, right? Lawyers believe scruples are what you use to pay in Russia, and morals are large paintings on walls. Okay, so you are probably wondering about my money. Yes, I actually did sell my firm. No, I didn't sell it to myself. I was not going to give Wanda any chance to stumble upon any information that she could use to take any part of the firm. I was getting rid of it. Besides, I wanted the cash. Since the sale occurred overseas and the money never entered United States of America jurisdiction, it was not subject to U.S. laws. The only way that Wanda could touch it was if I brought any of the money into a U.S. bank with the judgments against me. She could claim it. That simply was not going to happen. It was a lot of money. Added to that were my investment accounts that were in the $10 million range. Cash on hand from the safety deposit box, checking and savings accounts, and my safes with cash in them equaled around $200,000. Some of the cash I had used for my plans, but I still had around $150,000 on hand. I wasn't going to be taking any of the cash with me. So, it was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. We were having another barbecue with the extended family. All the preparations were complete and everything was set. The party was a lot of fun. I helped Howard with the grill and smoker. Julia, my lawyer, was there as well. Later in the afternoon, one of Cheryl's uncles walked up to me. He expressed his gratitude for me helping Cheryl and Howard out and was glad that we had finally reconnected. We talked for a bit, and he pulled an envelope out and handed it to me. I passed it over to Julia so she could put it in her briefcase. Later in the evening, I made an announcement. I announced that the lien holder for the ranch had declared that the mortgage for the ranch had been paid off and that Howard and Cheryl now owned the ranch free and clear. That caused a huge celebration. We partied our asses off that night. It was late that night when the guests started to leave. Julia couldn't stay the night because she had a flight to catch the next morning. She left with a group of 6 other cars. Oddly, her flight was out of an airport in the next state. She had packed previously and had everything in her leased car when she came to the party. She never went to her rented apartment. Instead, she went straight to the airport. No one witnessed the man climbing out of the back of her car in the parking garage, and no one took notice of the man casually walking 50 feet behind her as they made their way to the international terminal. Michael Nalen couldn't travel outside the U.S. because he had surrendered his passport to the court. Mitchell Nelson's passport never even garnered a second look. No one even gave a second look as they held hands in adjoining seats as they flew first class to Mexico City. Julia Davis suddenly disappeared there. Instead, Genia Nelson joined Mitchell Nelson for their connecting flight to Ecuador. It was 2 days later when Greg and Samantha Cooper reached their hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. They were now multiple members of the Mile High Club. Oddly, an old Chevy pickup that resembled the one which disappeared from the ranch owned by Howard and Cheryl was waiting for them at the hacienda. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for Michael Nalen. He had failed to show up to work 2 days after the barbecue. He was fired for a no-show, no-call. No payments to his ex-wife have been received since. When Howard and Cheryl were summoned before the court, a lawyer in a $5,000 skirt suit showed up with him. She successfully argued that the couple had no responsibility towards their cousin, he simply rented a room from them and then disappeared one day. They even produced their own suit against him for back rent. All the information that they could give was that he drove off in his old pickup one afternoon and just never came back. Of course, no one actually believed them, but there was no proof to the contrary. Over the next several years, Greg Cooper operated a small charter fishing boat, his wife Samantha ran their small cantina. They were well off in the small village, their hacienda was one of the larger ones with several luxuries. They occasionally had guests visit for periods of time. Harold and Cheryl were there often, as well as other family members of Howard and Cheryl. It was a simple yet pleasant life for both Greg and Sam. They loved each other fully. They spent most evenings entertaining guests in the small cantina or in their lavish hacienda. Being both wealthy and pleasant to all around, they were quickly accepted into the small community. Whenever a need was found in the community, they donated generously. It should be noted that Greg continually played the stock markets whenever he was not on his boat or in the cantina. He even set up accounts for some of the locals and assisted them in their finances. Oh, and the dishonorable Judge Marie Matthews? I actually laughed my ass off a few years after I had made my escape to Costa Rica. Judge Matthews' wife, of course, that man-hating, which was a lesbian, was caught cheating on her with a man. The judge had adopted her wife's 3 kids when they got married. Since they were married, Judge Matthews was stuck paying child support, maintenance, as well as maintaining house payments for her now ex-wife. To add to the humiliation, her ex-wife quickly moved her boyfriend into the house and continued to screw him. Whenever they were seen out in public, they acted like a typical married couple, except they never officially got married. I did hear a rumor that they finally set a wedding date. It will be a week after their youngest son graduates from college. Judge Matthews is required to pay child support and maintenance until the child graduates from college or until her ex-wife remarries. Odd timing on the marriage, it will be exactly 1 week after all of Judge Matthews' financial obligations to her ex-wife are satisfied. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.